Ever stopped and thought about how we got from, like, scratching sounds onto wax cylinders to, streaming music on our phones? It's kind of wild when you think about it. And today, we're going to really dive deep into that whole history of sound recording and production.
It's funny. The story really starts way before microphones or recording even existed. People have always, been drawn to sound.
Totally.
Yeah.
Think about it. Drums, flutes, those super early instruments. They were like the first ways people messed around with sound and made music.
And you can't forget architecture. Ancient civilizations were so smart about how they used spaces to amplify sound, like amphitheaters. They designed those with acoustics in mind so someone's voice could carry farther and no microphones needed.
Right. It's like they just understood how sound waves worked way before the science caught up.
Totally. And that understanding kept developing right alongside musical scales and tuning systems. Those were huge steps for standardizing, like how we even understand musical notes and harmonies. And that all led up to being able to record music.
So we've got humans loving sound, making music with whatever they can. But when did we figure out how to actually capture that sound? Like, so we could listen to it again later.
That's where things get really interesting. In 1857, this French inventor, Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville, he invents the phonautograph, kind of like a really, really early version of the record player.
The phonato, you're going to have to break that one down.
The phonautograph. It was a pretty clever gadget for its time. Basically, it could take sound waves and, get this, transcribe them onto paper.
Whoa, seriously?
Yeah.
So you could actually see what a sound wave would look like on a piece of paper.
Yeah. It was mainly used by scientists, but it was the very first time we could actually see a sound wave.
That is so cool. But you couldn't play it back, right?
It got it. It was more about seeing the sound, not hearing it again.
Okay, so we could see sound. That's pretty awesome on its own. But what about recording and playing it back? That seems like the big one.
You're right, that was the game changer. And that moment, that came in 1877, thanks to Thomas Edison.
Edison, the guy who invented, like, everything.
Uh-huh. Well, in the world of sound, he's known for the phonograph, the first ever record player.
So is this where everyone huddled around a giant cone and sang their hearts out?
Not a cone exactly, but you're getting closer. It used a cylinder covered in tinfoil. The sound vibrations, they were etched right onto the foil as the cylinder spun.
Wow. I bet that was something else, hearing your own voice played back to you like that.
Oh, it was a sensation. Of course, those early recordings were, shall we say, a little rough around the edges. You wouldn't mistake them for a modern recording, that's for sure.
So Edison cracks the code with the phonograph. Where does it go from there?
Well, things move fast. Just a few years later, in 1887, Emil Berliner, he comes along with the gramophone.
Okay, I'm getting that aha feeling. What was so special about the gramophone?
Berliner's big idea. He switched from cylinders to flat discs.
Wait a minute, are you saying this is the birth of the record?
Ding, 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 you got it. Discs were just way easier and cheaper to make a lot of than cylinders, which meant recorded music could actually, be sold and shared and actually become a thing.
It's amazing how one little change cylinder to a disc can change everything.
It's all about finding a better, easier way to do things, isn't it?
Okay, so now we can record and play back sound, and it's even something people can buy.
Yeah.
But what did those first recordings actually sound like? I'm imagining lots of hissing, lots of pops.
You're not wrong. Remember, this is still the era of purely acoustic recording. Picture this, a bunch of musicians all crammed around a giant horn playing their hearts out.
So they're all huddled around this giant horn like it's some kind of, I don't know, sonic gathering spot. What happens next?
Okay, so at the narrow end of this horn, there's a diaphragm. And when the sound waves hit that diaphragm, it vibrates.
Okay, makes sense. Vibration, sound waves, I'm with you.
Get this. That vibration would be transferred mechanically to a needle. And that needle, it would actually etch those vibrations onto something like a wax cylinder or a disc.
Wow. Talk about low tech. It's pretty amazing they could capture any sound at all with a setup like that.
It was pretty ingenious for the time. But yeah, it definitely had its limitations. The sound quality, well, it was often really muffled. And you could only capture a pretty narrow range of frequencies. Plus, any little noise in the studio, it got picked up, a cough, a chair squeaking, it all ended up on the recording.
Oh, I bet. And I'm guessing there were no second takes back then.
Nope, they had one shot to get it right.
It's like every recording session was a live performance, with everyone holding their breath, hoping for the best.
Pretty much. I mean, they would even arrange the performers in a specific way around the horn just to try and get a decent balance in the sound.
That's wild. So much work just to capture a little bit of sound. It really makes you appreciate how easy we have it today. I mean, we can record a whole album on our phones now, and it sounds better than anything they could have imagined back then.
Oh, absolutely. But there's something about those early recordings, you know? They captured a moment in time. And even though they weren't perfect, they still brought music and culture to a lot of people.
So how do we go from those early recordings to, the clearer, more modern sound? I mean, what was the next big leap?
That brings us to the 1920s and the invention of electrical recording. This is where things start to sound a little more familiar, a little more like what we're used to today.
Okay, yeah, electrical recording. Now things are starting to get interesting. Tell me more.
So in 1925, Western Electric, they come out with something that's going to change everything, the electric microphone.
No more giant horn. Finally. So how did this new microphone actually work?
These early microphones, they were called condenser microphones. They use a thin diaphragm that would vibrate when sound waves hit it. But, and this is the big difference, those vibrations, they were converted into electrical signals.
And that meant you could do a lot more with the sound.
Exactly. You could amplify those signals, make them stronger, using these things called vacuum tubes. And that meant you could capture a way wider range of frequencies, which meant,
Clearer recordings.
yeah,
Music with more depth and detail.
you got it. It's easy to forget how revolutionary that was. We just expect clear, high-quality audio now without even thinking about it.
It's true. We just plug in our headphones and expect the magic to happen. But all of that, it started with these early innovations in microphone and amplification technology.
Totally. They set the stage for everything that came after.
Okay, so now we can capture sound way more accurately. Where does that take us? What happens next in this sonic evolution?
Well, this is where sound really finds its voice. And not just in music, but in entertainment as a whole. Think about movies.
You're talking about the talkies, those first movies with sound.
Exactly. 1927, The Jazz Singer. That was a game changer. The end of the silent film era.
I can only imagine what that was like for people back then. Hearing actors talk on screen for the first time, it must have been like magic.
It was huge. Suddenly, film wasn't just visual. It was an auditory experience. You had dialogue, music, sound effects, all synced with the action. A whole new way to tell stories on screen.
It's crazy to think about how quickly we adapt, right? It's hard to imagine watching a silent film now.
I know, right? But getting those early talkies to work, it was a challenge. They used sound on disc systems. Basically, the audio, it was on a separate record player that they had to sync up with the film projector.
That sounds like a recipe for disaster. How often did it get out of sync?
More often than you'd think. But luckily, they came up with a better solution, optical soundtracks. They figured out how to put the audio directly on the film strip.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So the audio is right there on the film. No more syncing issues. That's clever.
It was a huge breakthrough. It made everything smoother and more reliable. And it really opened up the creative possibilities for sound and film.
So this is where sound design starts to become like a real art form.
Exactly. Sound designers, they weren't just trying to capture dialogue, they were using sound to set the mood, to build suspense, to really pull the audience into the story.
So it's not just about hearing the actors speak. It's about all those little details. Footsteps, creaking doors, all that stuff. That's what really brings a scene to life.
Totally. And this is also when we start to see the first experiments with multi-channel recording, like Disney's Fantasia, that came out in 1940. They used this system, Fantasound. It was a really early form of surround sound.
Fantasound. I've heard of that, but what was it exactly? Was it like having speakers all around the theater?
Yeah. They had multiple channels of audio, and it was played back through this whole system of speakers positioned all around the theater. Imagine hearing that orchestral score, those dynamic sound effects coming at you from every direction.
That must have been absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the difference between listening to music on one speaker and then experiencing it in surround sound. It's night and day.
Exactly. It showed everyone what sound could really do in film.
Wow. What a journey so far. We've gone from like etching sound onto tinfoil to synchronized audio for movies, even experimenting with surround sound. It's amazing.
Yeah.
What's next? What's the next big leap forward in this sonic revolution?
Well, up next is the world of magnetic tape and multi-tracking. And that, my friend, changes everything about how we record and play with sound.
Okay, so last time we were talking about magnetic tape, didn't we say that was going to be a revolution?
Oh, yeah, magnetic tape, that was huge. I mean, night and day compared to what came before.
So remind me, where did this magnetic tape thing even come from?
Well, it all started back in the 1930s in Germany. There was this device, the magnetophone, and instead of those grooves on discs, the magnetophone, it used magnetic tape to actually capture the sound.
Okay, so we're trading grooves For magnetism. Got it. But why was that such a big deal?
Oh, it was a game changer for a bunch of reasons. First off, the quality. The fidelity of the sound was just way better than anything you could get with those old school recordings.
But it just sounded bad.
Oh, way better. But it wasn't just the sound itself, it was also how you could work with it. You see, magnetic tape, you could actually cut it, you could splice it together, rearrange things. Try doing that with a wax cylinder.
Huh. Good point. No more carving up your recordings with a knife.
Exactly. And then there's the fact that you could play with the speed of the tape, you could slow it down, speed it up, get all those cool effects. Like that slow, eerie voice you sometimes hear in music. That's tape manipulation right there.
So creative. It's like suddenly sound engineers could really get in there and experiment.
Exactly. But the biggest thing, the thing that really blew the doors open, was multi-tracking.
Multi-tracking. I knew this was coming. Didn't Les Paul have something to do with this?
Les Paul was a genius, an amazing guitarist, sure, but he was also an inventor, a tinkerer. And he realized that if you used multiple tracks on a tape recorder, well, you could record different instruments, different vocals, separately. Then you could just mix them together later.
It's like a whole new world opened up. No more cramming everyone around a giant horn, hoping for the best. Now you could isolate instruments, add layers, try things out in post-production. It must have felt like magic.
It was a whole new way of thinking about making music. And that's where we get so much of what we hear in music today. Those layered harmonies, the overdubs, multi-tracking made it all possible.
That's so cool. One invention, and it just changed the course of music. But we didn't just stop there, did we?
Oh no, the quest to make audio even better, it was just getting started. Around the 1950s, things shifted from capturing sound to playing it back with as much detail and richness as possible. We're talking crisp highs, deep lows, that kind of thing.
So this is the birth of the audiophile, those people who are really serious about their sound systems.
Exactly. They wanted to recreate the feeling of a live performance right there in their living room.
Okay, so now it's not just about recording the music well. It's also about having the equipment that can actually do that recording justice. It's like a whole new way of thinking about listening.
You got it. And that's when you started to see better turntables, better speakers, better amplifiers. Everything had to be top-notch to get that perfect sound.
And didn't stereo come along around this time too?
Right on cue.
Right.
1957, stereo sound hits the scene. Another total game changer. I mean, before stereo, everything was monophonic. One channel of sound. Imagine all your music coming out of one speaker.
It's kind of hard to imagine now, isn't it? Like listening to everything in black and white after you've experienced color.
That's a great way to put it. But stereo, it was a revelation. Two channels left and right to create space and depth that you just couldn't get with mono. Suddenly, the music wasn't just in front of you, it was all around you.
It must have blown people's minds, like putting on a pair of headphones for the first time and realizing you're hearing things you never even noticed before.
Exactly. Suddenly, those old mono recordings, they just sounded flat, lifeless.
Wow, what a difference. Okay, so we've got higher fidelity, we've got stereo sound. Audio sounded pretty good, but this is still all analog, right? And then along comes the digital revolution. I mean, that was massive.
Yeah.
How did that whole transition to digital even happen?
Well, you're right, the digital revolution, it changed everything. It was driven by wanting even better sound, more detail, and, really importantly, more control. And the big innovation here is something called pulse code modulation. We call it PCM for short.
PCM. Okay, I've definitely heard of that, but I'll be honest, I'm not 100% sure what it is.
It sounds complicated, but the basic idea is pretty simple. Remember how we've been talking about sound waves? They're analog,
Right.
smooth and continuous. PCM takes those smooth waves and turns them into, get this, ones and zeros, a digital code that computers can understand.
So we're taking something that's real, that's physical, those vibrations in the air, and turning it into, like, computer language. That's wild. What did that actually let us do?
It opened up a whole new universe. All of a sudden, you could store sound digitally. You could edit it in ways you couldn't even imagine before. In the late 70s and early 80s, you started to see these digital audio recorders popping up. They're expensive, sure, but they showed everyone where things were headed. But I think for most people, the digital audio revolution really hit home with the CD.
The compact disc. The CD. I remember getting my first CD player like it was yesterday. It was like a spaceship had landed in my living room.
Huh. It was a big deal. Think about it, 1982, that's when the CD first came out. Way better sound than those old records or cassette tapes. Plus, they were practically indestructible. No more scratches or hissing. And they could hold so much more music than a vinyl record. It's no wonder everyone jumped on the CD bandwagon.
And those jewel cases. So futuristic. But CDs, that was really just the start, wasn't it? Pretty soon we were making music digitally, too.
Right, and that's when you get the rise of the digital audio workstation, the DAW.
Yeah, they changed everything. I can't imagine making music without one now.
Right. And it all started with software like Pro Tools. That came out in 1991. Suddenly, you could record, edit, mix, you name it, all on your computer. No more needing a big, fancy recording studio.
So empowering.
Yeah.
Like anyone could be a musician. I mean, some of the music we listen to today was probably made by someone sitting in their bedroom with their instruments and their laptop. It's amazing.
It really is. And think about all the other ways digital audio has changed things. Movies, video games, we're surrounded by incredibly rich soundscapes now. It's mind-blowing how far we've come.
We really have. Our phones, they're like mini recording studios and listening booths all in one. It's really incredible when you think about that whole journey of sound, from those first scratchy recordings to, well, everything we can do today. It's pretty amazing.
It really is. It makes you wonder what's next. What crazy, awesome new sounds are we going to be listening to in the future? What new ways are we going to capture those sounds?
I can't wait to find out. It's been a real trip taking this deep dive into the history of sound recording and production. It's a story of creativity and innovation, and this never-ending quest to capture the world through sound. Who knows what amazing sonic adventures await us in the future? Thanks for joining us.